if Xi Jinping really wanted this war to stop, he could pick up the phone right now and call Putin and it would stop, because Russia is just way, way too beholden to China right now for all sorts of things. But, it needs to be said as well that China is in the background propping up Russia's war machine, pretty sophisticated drone technology, chips, things like that. So, they don't exactly have their hands clean here. But I do like to think that it's in their best interest to have a more stable world, more stable economy, and see that this war ends. And one more point, a lot of people forget that before the war started, Mr. Zelensky referred to China as one of Ukraine's biggest economic partners. So they have interest too, minerals, energy, that sort of thing.
What do you think it would take to get Beijing to the point where they would actually, when Xi Jinping would make that call to Vladimir Putin and say, look, now is the time to withdraw from Ukraine, now is the time to end this war? Because some might say, actually, a destabilized West, Europe at war, is actually in China's strategic interest.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I mean, look at it, the shenanigans they're up to in the South China Sea, or what the Filipinos call the West Philippine Sea. But I'll tell you what the red line is going to be, and God forbid that we reach that point, and that is when Mr. Putin's forces either tinker with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which they occupy, and there's a release of nuclear there, or if Putin uses tactical nuclear weapons or other nuclear weapons. That will be the red line, I believe, and China will demand an end to it because they've made that pretty clear. I know there's a lot of ifs in all of this. We also have to remember that at the Olympic Games in China, Putin was reportedly asked by Xi Jinping whether he's going to invade Ukraine, and he said no. He actually lied to him. So there's no givens here, but all of us, I'm sure, agree that Russia should not be allowed to cross a certain line, and that's when China will really put its foot down.
Is Russia slowly becoming more isolated internationally? I mean, we talked about those countries that abstained and the BRIC nations, China not attending. There is a lot of speculation that Vladimir Putin may actually visit Pyongyang this week and make his first visit to North Korea in more than 20 years. Obviously, that's an increasingly significant alliance. Is Putin building more alliances, or is he becoming more isolated globally?
Yeah, and by the way, that North Korea visit, that'll be the first leader to come to Pyongyang since COVID, so it's a big thing on both sides. I was recently in Thailand, and my head was just shaking all the time because I could not believe the amount of Russian tourists and Russian expats actually living there. And they're already so entrenched. They're already said to be controlling some key sectors of the economy in places like Phuket. But you go, for example, to Phuket Airport, and it looks like a regional Russian airport. Flights to Vladivostok, Moscow, and elsewhere. And I stood there for a while, and I counted 2 or 3 Boeing aircraft under Russian flags and an Airbus. So I thought that both manufactured had stopped supplying spare parts to Russia. Now, I know they're probably trading behind the door through countries like Gabon and UAE and Thailand, but it goes to show you how much they've been able to avert these sanctions, to work around them. But also, it goes to show you that when it comes to countries like Thailand, like Turkey, like the UAE, like the Maldives, they rely very, very much on Russian trade and Russian investment and Russian tourism. And that has helped Mr. Putin, bust these sanctions, as have countries which have provided ships that allow him, for example, to ship illegal oil and stolen Ukrainian grain. So, yeah, it's sanctions are a tough thing. Isolating a country as big as Russia is a very tough thing as well, especially if main players don't want to take part.
On the topic of sanctions, Michael, last week the G7 agreed to use frozen Russian assets to raise $50 billion for Ukraine. Meanwhile, the US and Ukraine have also agreed a 10-year bilateral security agreement. What do you make of those, and do either of them go far enough?
Well, the one regarding the frozen Russian assets, primarily in Europe, and using the interest from that to back a loan to Ukraine, that to me represents a big deal. That is a break in the ice of Western leaders' fear to actually use those Russian assets. So that's a real big positive. The Ukrainians would like them to go further and use all, I believe it's 300 billion, but I think we'll see a drip, drip, drip approach on that one. And also, you'll remember it was referred to as a loan, and I think that was used to not set off alarm bells in places like the European Central Bank, which is absolutely obsessed with protecting the integrity of the euro. In terms of the security pact with the United States, that was the biggest of many that had been concluded recently. But we have to remember that this is an executive agreement, so hence it's prone to cancellation by an incoming American president, such as a Mr. Trump. But it does send out a huge signal to Russia that what is happening between those agreements, between the use of the frozen Russian assets and other developments, is that these Western leaders, many of whom are advanced age and many of whom are facing elections and probably will not be reelected, but I think what they're doing is trying to kind of fireproof the Ukraine aid so that it's more predictable, it's more substantial. And the other thing they're wisely doing is making sure that it looks like aid to Ukraine is not coming from the pockets of taxpayers, rather it's coming from, for example, seized Russian assets. So that's a really positive development. Let's see also whether NATO comes together and also gets, I think it's about 30 or 40 billion a year in military aid to Ukraine. That would be a big game changer as well. The Moldovan foreign minister was here in Odessa, spoke at the Black Sea Security Forum, and the story of Moldova and how it's transformed itself and totally changed its energy dependence, looking more westward, is a big, big thing. It can happen a lot quicker than anyone thought. And if anyone has any doubt on how this has affected Kremlin finances, well, have a look at some of the statistics, because they're having to shop now for clients for their oil in countries that can't afford to pay the full price at the pump, if we can put it that way. So their income has gone way down. And also, we have to remember that the Russians have been forced also to switch their economy to a very wartime economy just to keep the war machine going. So many factors there. The Russian economy is a lot more vulnerable than before the war, before the full-scale invasion. And then, look, here in Odessa, which feeds about 400 million people worldwide, I was just at the port yesterday for the first time since the war started. And, that the throughput of grain and sunflower oil is almost at pre-war levels now. They're about to start container shipping again. And this has been done by a country virtually with no navy. So that's pretty darn impressive and also destroying about 30 to 40% of the Russian Black Sea fleet in Crimea, pushing Russian ships back. That has shown that Ukraine takes its role seriously as one of the main providers of food to the world. It shows that given the chance, they can inflict quite major damage on the Russians. So there are some pieces of good news here too that we're seeing happen.
Is there more still, though, that we could be doing, Michael? I was speaking recently on Frontline to Owen Matthews, historian and Russia correspondent for The Spectator, and he was arguing that if the US really wanted to damage the Russian economy, they should be ramping up their own oil and gas production, trying to flood the market, depress the global price of oil, and that would have a huge detrimental effect on the Putin regime.
Yeah, and that was an idea that U.S. Ambassador Kurt Volker floated the other day, that if we're serious about inflicting pain on Russia, we should be ramping up production. But there's also reporting in the past few days that there's actually an existing oil glut right now, but that there's been oil production, that consumption is still not at where it used to be pre-COVID levels. So I'm not sure how much that would inflict pain on Russia in the short term, but that is their big weakness, energy. And as things change, as for example, some economies are switching much more to electric vehicles, that sort of thing. It's not only Russia, but it's many other oil producers that are going to feel a very, very different economic climate.